Hello, I'm Kerry Shamblin, and I practice jyotisha, also known as Vedic astrology. I have been offering a monthly forecast since 1999 where I track how the planets are moving through the sky and how they may be affecting our life on Earth. I also work directly with others through counseling, teaching, and mentoring. The topic today is a story called the Samudra Manthan, which is translated as the churning of the cosmic ocean. This is a therapeutic myth that comes from the Vedic culture that I find myself telling people all the time when I'm working with them in a private astrology session. The Samudra Manthan is not about astrology per se, neither are many of these therapeutic Vedic myths, but within them are so many lessons on so many levels. So today I'll tell you the Samudra Manthan, my favorite version of it. If you go looking for Vedic stories, you'll find that there's many variations, but generally the message, the underlying kernel, the pith of the story is the same. So as it goes, in once upon a time, there are the group of beings that we call the Devas in Vedic thought. Devas are the divine beings of light. The translation that often comes up with Deva is gods, which isn't wrong. But let's just say that they're the divine beings of light. On the other end of the rope on this story are the Asura. The Asura are the divine beings of darkness. So another way we can call them is the Sura and the Asura. But in this case, we're going to call them the Devas and the Asuras. Now, in translation, Asura also often comes out as demon, which I don't think is a good English translation for this word. I think it's better if we keep in our mind they're divine beings all, and the Devas are the lights and the Asuras are the dark. Is darkness demonic? I don't think so. I think are light beings always good? Maybe not, right? So let's not think good and bad here. Let's think light and dark, and let's divorce the idea of good from light and bad from dark. This is light and dark. Just like every day we have the sunrise and then it sets. We have the light part of the day and the dark part of the day. There's beautiful things about the night and there's terrible things about the day. So it's not about good or bad. Okay, one day the Devas decided they had heard tell of a substance called Amrit. Amrit meaning nectar, the nectar of immortality. They heard of this thing existing, and they decided that it would be great if they could find it, and that way they would become immortal. So they decided to make this quest, and they set up a giant machine, basically, to churn the cosmic ocean, because in their thinking, if they churned up everything, then eventually things would become dislodged and they could find that Amrita, the nectar of immortality. So they found the giant cosmic turtle, decided he would be the fulcrum or pivot for this churn. Vasuki, the giant snake, decided he would be the lever, and he made himself stiff and got on top of the turtle. And this was a giant project. And once they got it all set up, the Devas realized they couldn't really do it on their own. So they went to the Asuras and said, hey, guys, we're doing this project. We're going to churn the cosmic ocean. We're in the quest for Amrita, the nectar of immortality. Would you be interested in getting on the other side of this churn and giving us some muscle? Of course, the Asuras agreed. Of course. Who wouldn't want the nectar of immortality? So they got the churn going. The Devas on one side, the Asuras on the other, and they began to churn. And it took a while. But eventually, many things began to spit out as they planned. Many things came out. During that churning, even Lakshmi appeared during that churning. And eventually, Dhanvantari came. Dhanvantari is a form of Vishnu that we associate with medicine. So Dhanvantari is the god of Ayurveda or any kind of natural medicine. So Dhanvantari emerges from this cosmic ocean holding this pot of nectar and offers it to the Devas. It was just then that the Devas realized that they didn't really want to share this nectar with the Asuras. After all that they had done, they really didn't think that the Asuras deserved to have immortality. So they decided to deceive them and give them a substitute. Some wine, some women, have a nice party. Here you go, Asuras. We're going to do our own party over here. For the most part, their deception worked. This is funny. A lot of times when I'm telling the story, people will say the good guys did that, and I will remind them that we're not talking about good and bad. We're talking about light and dark. So let's get the judgment out and realize that nobody's perfect. Anyway, the Asuras, for the most part, fell for it. They enjoyed their wine and their women, and life went on. But one of the Asura was so intelligent and so smart, he realized that this was a deception. And he realized that the wine they were given was not the nectar of immortality. So, being a genius, his name was Swarbanu. Swarbanu decided to disguise himself as a deva and go into their camp and try to get himself some of that nectar of immortality. So he enters the gathering looking just like any of them and sat down in the circle, and when it came his turn to sip from the pot of nectar, he did so. And just after that, the sun and the moon, the great luminaries, the lights, became aware that Swarbanu was not one of the devas. So they called out to Vishnu in alarm and said, "Oh my God, an Asura has gotten in. Please take care of this Vishnu." So Vishnu took out his chakra. A chakra is like a sharp frisbee. And he threw that chakra at Swarbanu and took his head off. Separated him head from body. And the thing is, though, Swarbanu had just taken that nectar of immortality. So he didn't die. He didn't perish. He just became separated. And he became two different beings. And the reason why I tell this story a lot in the sessions I do with people is that the two beings that Swarbanu became when he got that separative action was Rahu and Ketu. In Vedic astrology, we see Rahu and Ketu as the nodes of the moon. In Western astrology, the nodes of the moon are consulted. The nodes of the moon are abstract mathematical points in space. We can't see them, but they mark eclipse points so that when the sun and moon align with the north and south node of the moon, that is when we get eclipses, which happen roughly twice a year in a pair. At the sun, the new moon will have an eclipse, and then the full moon will have an eclipse. It's not always in that order, but this is the eclipse factor. So Rahu and Ketu are created from the story of the Samudra Manthan, which brings into question the symbolism that this all means. When we look at our astrology chart and look at the nodes of the moon, which in Vedic astrology we use very strongly, the position of Rahu and Ketu in the chart is quite telling. Western astrology does track the nodes of the moon. Their belief is that the north node of the moon will show the future direction for the person, and that the south node will show their past, which doesn't really conflict with the way we see it in Vedic astrology, but we have such a more nuanced, informative view of the nodes of the moon. So the north node of the moon corresponds with Rahu, and the south node corresponds with Ketu. And when it comes to Swarbanu, who was one being that got separated, the head of Swarbanu becomes Rahu, and the body of Swarbanu becomes Ketu. In our chart, Rahu shows extreme desire of the person or place or thing that you're reading the chart for. It shows an extreme desire. And when I'm tracking that in a personal chart, to me, it's like a kid raising their hand saying, I really want this. This is the experience I really, really want to have. In the same way that Swarbanu really, really wanted that Amrita. He really wanted that nectar, to the point where he masqueraded himself and became someone else so that he could get what he wanted. So when we study Rahu in the chart, there is quite a bit of desire, and it's not always bad. Sometimes it's desire for good things. I think the important thing is that we don't really judge whether it's good or bad. Remember my advice. This isn't about good or bad. It's about light or dark. And there can be good in light and bad in light, and good in dark and bad in dark. So free yourself from that kind of strict judgment. Ketu in our chart, which is the body that's left without a head of Swarbanu, becomes a very spiritual marker. When we're talking about Ketu in a chart, we're seeing how that person isn't really interested in engaging in life, how they perhaps are reaching toward spiritual goals or liberation from the cycle of rebirth. So that is what we look at in the chart when we're looking at Rahu and Ketu. And it all comes back to the Samudra Manthan, the story of the churning of the cosmic ocean, where Rahu and Ketu are really created out of what was once one being. To me, this is an amazing therapeutic myth that even describes our human experience in general. When we're born, we have this experience of coming from some sort of cosmic spot, at least mentally and spiritually, and we're slowly percolating into this tiny body that's being carried by our mother. So when we're in the womb, the feeling of oneness is all we know. Our consciousness is completely wound up within our mother's body. So at the moment of birth, we are ejected from this safe, warm feeling of unity into a cold, scary world where we have to bring air into our lungs and somehow find food and somehow stay safe. So that is also why I think we study the birth chart as the moment of birth, the separation from the mother. It's a lot like the feeling of Swarbanu was once one, and he wanted something. But in order to, as a result of getting that thing, he becomes two things and separated. Isn't that really what we're doing here on the planet Earth? We're coming down from a feeling of unified divinity, and we're suddenly thrust into a world where the name of the game is you and me, and I'm over here and you're over there, and I have an agenda and you have an agenda, and they don't always match, but yet we also want to connect and have relationships. To me, life on Earth is the study of duality. We were once one, and now we're separate, And all we tend to want to do as humans is get back together with other humans and pull ourselves together into groups and couples and family units and countries and societies and cultures. So I love the story of the Samudra Manthan. You can go on the internet and find other versions of it, but it is an amazing therapeutic myth that makes us think about who we are, why we're here, and what we're doing. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to this presentation. If you are interested in following my work, look for Kerry Shamblin Astrology on YouTube, Spotify, Patreon, Facebook, and Instagram. My monthly forecast is published in written and audio format on my website, planetaryinfluence.com, where you can join my email list or book a one-on-one session with me. My goal is to light your path toward a joyful and liberated life experience.